Hello, everyone. Happy November. My name is Father Jacob Rouse, and I am the pastor of Notre Dame Parish in Cresco, Iowa. And welcome to the Dubuqueistic Revival Podcast, Season 2.
Because that's the name we're going with.
Thank you, Father Kevin. Who are you?
I'm Father Kevin Earlywide, pastor of St. Mary's Catholic Church in Ackley and St. Patrick's in Hampton. And I'm
Marvelous.
co-hosting this podcast.
You are co-hosting. Today we have a very exciting guest. We have the Rector of St. Pius X Seminary, Father Jeff Dole. And I'd like him to introduce himself. But how reverend are you? Are you very reverend?
I suppose I am. I
Okay.
suppose the church gives me the title very reverend, but it's not because of me. It's because of the office that I'm in.
Hmm.
Obviously, the church cares very deeply about priestly formation, and there's a lot at stake in obviously bringing about the life of Christ in the hearts of these men who are discerning a call to the priesthood, and that's my responsibility. So the very reverend, it might sound like it's just, it's all about me, but really it reminds me of what I'm supposed to be all about, for the sake of others, devoting myself to the work of bringing about these guys, to be able to pray and to discern what they need to discern.
That is a very, very reverend call that you have.
That's right. But no,
Um,
it's good to be here with you guys. Thanks for the invitation to have me on. Like you said, my name is Father Jeff Dole. I am the rector of the St. Pius X Seminary here at Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa. I'm also the sacramental priest at St. Columkill, which is our local parish where the seminary is. So I go over there from time to time and help celebrate Mass. Um, just like the two of you, I'm a priest of the Archdiocese of Dubuque. Happy to serve wherever the Archbishop sends me. He has sent me before to places like Dyersville and Worthington and Petersburg and New Vienna and
hmm.
Earlville, as well as Jessup and Dunkerton, and by association with Don Bosco to Gilbertville. But the past 4 years, he sent me over to Rome to do a little study,
Mhm.
to try to get smart, hopefully to get a degree, which is pending.
Mm-hmm.
And now he has me here, hopefully to put to use that knowledge that I've been learning these past 4 years. But more than anything, hopefully to prepare the next generation of priests for our archdiocese.
Amen.
Well, you've been everywhere, man. How long have you been a priest?
So I've been a priest for 11 years, and in no way does that make me feel old. I still feel like it has only been a couple years. I mean, that's partly, I suppose, that's life. Life just goes quicker than what we think it does.
Hmm.
But partly it's also just shows the great variety of the life of a priest.
Mm-hmm.
We do so many different things. Uh, every day is a little bit different than the last. Every year is a little bit different than the last. And man, when you're having fun, time flies, as they say.
Amen.
That's a good way to
Amen.
say it. Well, the reason we wanted to have you on specifically is because, as you know, season 2 is highlighting specific movements and ministries within the archdiocese, and you are in the archdiocese. We wanted to talk a little bit about seminary formation, what it's like. Sorry, what it was like, what it's like now, and why that's important. So before we get to you, Father Kevin, where did you go to seminary, and what was your formation like?
Oh, yeah. I actually went to a place called St. Pius X Seminary in Dubuque, Iowa, which is, in fact, where, as was already named, where Father Jeff Dole is now currently serving as rector, though at the time I was there, he was not the rector. And then, of course, I was among the first Dubuque seminarians to be sent to Mundelein Seminary to study theology. Did 4 years there and was ordained.
Hmm.
So I think we were using then something called the Program of Priestly Formation PPF. I believe the fifth edition. Is that what we were all under?
That's right.
I think
Yeah.
so. I actually went to St. Pius X Seminary at Loras College, uh, and did
Also.
an undergraduate in philosophy, and lived in the same house as Father Kevin Earlywine, and then
Mhm.
followed him to Mundelein Seminary in northern Chicago. Very Reverend Jeff Dole, where did you go to seminary?
So I also went to St. Pius X Seminary here at Loras College, just
Oh,
like
Wow.
the two of you. It's very common, it still is, for guys to get a degree in philosophy. And here in the Archdiocese, we start the process of seminary to get that degree here. And so, just like the two of you, I was here, and then I was sent over to Rome to the Pontifical North American College with a few other of our seminarians before we sent exclusively to Mundelein, as in your time. We were split up to different seminaries depending on the will of the Archbishop, wherever he kind of wanted guys to go. And so I went over with two others to Rome and got a theology degree over there.
So it sounds like the main part of everyone who's a priest, no matter the diocese or archdiocese, is going to get a philosophy degree first and then get a theology degree somewhere.
That's right. Now, way back when, we used to do all of that right here, homegrown in Dubuque, Iowa. Way
Huh.
back when, we had a place called St. Bernard Seminary.
Mm-hmm.
And after getting a philosophy degree from Loras College, guys would just stay right here in town, continue their formation, and get a theology degree from St. Bernard's. But back in the early 70s, that closed down. And from that point on, we started sending guys away to get their theology degree. So we continue to get a philosophy degree here in Dubuque, but our theology degree is sent away. It's kind of an interesting thing that the church would have us so well educated. Um, like, Father Kevin, do you know why? Why did you have to study philosophy and Descartes and Plato before learning about Jesus and the church and actually those priestly things that
Mm-hmm.
you do and you love and you're all about now?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you what. When I started as a seminarian, my first year, I asked that very question: why do I have to study this philosophy? Because I started with modern philosophy too. So that was, what is the meaning of anything? Does anything exist? However, I've come to really appreciate it. Um, and so there's many reasons why the church has us study philosophy. But what I came to appreciate is, of course, first of all, just the history of thought, and how much kind of what are the big questions, because philosophy, of course, delves with those big questions that do kind of uh, bleed over into theology. Questions like what does it mean to be good and to live life well? What is the meaning of our existence? What is the human soul, and how do we apply our reason to understand those deeper questions? So those were all certainly um, questions. But a couple other things I came to really appreciate about it, more later when I was studying theology. One is just the skill of learning to kind of enter into kind of someone's worldview and thinking, and being able to kind of play that out to its kind of natural consequence. Because I found that is just a very practical pastoral thing, right? Because we get different thought patterns, or people have different ideas, and you kind of, and helping you understand the person and where they're coming from, you kind of have to enter into their framework of thinking and thought. And philosophy certainly cultivates that skill. But also, of course, Christians, the early Christians, very much built upon philosophy. As Roman, philosophy was very common in the Roman Empire, and so the early Christians, as they were articulating theology, very much built on the using philosophical terms and building on that to help articulate the faith. Um, they say theology is uh, faith-seeking understanding, and that philosophy was kind of priming the way to give a kind of mode of articulation to understand theology. And our great theologian giants like Saint Augustine and Saint Thomas Aquinas, who were very formative in our theology, drew very heavily upon the foundation of the philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. Um, yeah, and then I guess lastly, just engaging the world and trying to understand the world and where they're at in their thinking. Philosophy kind of helps us understand sort of contemporary thinking, and how to engage with that. So those are some of my responses why the church would have us study philosophy.
What
Yeah.
grade, uh, Father Jeff? What grade would you give Kevin in that answer?
Oh, I would give him an A plus.
Oh,
A
thanks.
plus plus. No, Father Kevin did very well. And indeed, philosophy is the handmaiden, right, of theology. And so before we dive into our theological studies, it is important for us to get that wider context of human thinking and human thought, which is a great privilege. You know, some of the guys in seminary, maybe myself included, you know, we kind of moan and groan about having to put in all of these long, hard years from class to class, going through philosophy. But it opens the mind to ask the questions. When you go to seminary, you don't have to be a straight A student like Father Kevin, who gives these awesome answers. You you are asked, though, to apply yourself in such a way as to open your mind and open your heart to just a greater reality than just our little meager selves. Ultimately, we're opening ourselves up to receive the answer that is Jesus Christ. And that's a pretty big answer. So you really kind of have to open up that mind. You don't want just to give him a little bit of space. You want to give him a lot of bit of space to make a home in your heart. So yeah, philosophy continues to be and was a very important aspect of seminary prior to going off to theology.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that as well. Maybe not as well spoken as Father Kevin, but learning everyone from the Catholic theologian philosophers to the famous atheist philosophers. I mean, people who you encounter in the parish may not exactly know who Immanuel Kant or David Hume were or was, but they are definitely influenced by their thought from morality to the existence of the divine. And yeah, all those are still out there. And so to be able to study them and name them and identify them, and then how they either relate or contradict our faith, I think it's very, very important. So,
Yeah. Now, of course, Father Jacob, I'm going to put you on the spot now, since Father Kevin did such a great job of answering a question.
See if you get an A this time.
Yeah, we'll see if you get an A plus plus. So, learning philosophy, learning theology, going to class, that's just one pillar, shall we say, upon which the whole experience of being formed for the priesthood, the whole experience of seminary is all about. There are others. It's not just about class or philosophy. Can you name, in addition to the intellectual pillar, the other three pillars upon which your formation stood?
the ship. Yes, yes, the mighty ship that sails through formation. The intellectual, which we've named, the spiritual, the pastoral, and then the human formation.
Ah, applause.
All four of these
Applause.
pillars
Well done.
support priestly formation, or if you want to go with another image that was used, is the human formation is the base of the ship, and then the three others are the masts that carry it with the sail. Yeah. So as Father Jeff, did I get an A plus?
Yeah, of course. You
Okay,
named him.
good. Yeah, because being a priest and you can know stuff, and a lot of us know some things. And as we obviously have seen, that is not everything. There has to be a balance and an integration of who the person is who is going through seminary formation. And that's why there's not just the intellectual, the grades, the academic work, but there's the spiritual, pastoral, and human. You want to talk a little bit about each one of those?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You can definitely say that the human formation is increasingly being recognized as one of the most important aspects, maybe taken for granted, that guys who are discerning the call to the priesthood would know how to relate, would understand relationships and boundaries, would be able to enter into human relationships, as they need. It's something that increasingly we can't just take for granted. There's a lot about our society that keeps us, well, perhaps not fully human, right? Whether it's technology and screens, whether it's just the individualism and the materialism that continues to dominate in our society. There's just so many factors that kind of keep us just kind of in our box. And so formation, in addition to teaching philosophy and theology, is meant to challenge guys to go deeper into their own humanity and to explore and to see who it is that they truly are and what they're truly capable of. And the sort of friend and the sort of brother that they're called to be to others. Of course, this then is only made more magnificent by that spiritual pillar, right? That pillar of going deeply into the Holy Spirit, going deeply into prayer, and recognizing that He is present to give gifts, to give charisms, to enliven, and to send them forward. And so, in addition to kind of seeing and viewing our humanity, we want to also see and view the humanity of Christ enlivened by the Spirit, because the more we put that in front of our eyes and in front of our hearts, the more we'll resemble that and be Christ for the sake of others. And then lastly, having been so formed, of course, we need to give of ourselves for the sake of others. And that's what the pastoral pillar was all about, right? Equipping us with the know-how of how it is that the church hands on the faith through the celebration of the sacraments, through her prayer and the liturgy of the hours, and through all of the different celebrations that the church continues to hand on from generation to generation. And so guys need to engage with that and test it out. Pray in front of people, lead a Bible study, catechize the faith to others. And through all of that, they also are helped and aided in their discernment of whether or not the Lord is calling them in this direction.
Well, if I have any authority vested in me as co-host of this podcast, I would give you an A+ as well.
Oh, wow. That's very generous. Very
So,
generous indeed.
So we were all undergoing priestly formation, kind of together and at different times, 11 max years ago. And we all were operating under those 4 pillars of formation. As it was said, Father Kevin and I went to Loras for 2 to 3 years to get philosophy. And then we went to Mundelein for 4 years. And the trajectory of that was we were installed as candidates to serve our first year. Then we had our second year, and then our third year, and then we were ordained deacons the spring after our junior year, we'll call it. And then we served or lived as seniors, as it were, for an entire school year, and then were ordained a priest and graduated. So it seems like that's kind of how it was. And of course, with various internships and parish work intermingled with all the academics. But it was 4 years of basically graduate study and then being ordained at the end of it. Is that still kind of the same schedule or trajectory that we're working with right now?
So it's still somewhat the rough outline. And yet, even though we were all formed under the 5th edition of the PPF, or the Program for Priestly Formation, newly minted in the past few years is the 6th edition of the PPF. And with the 6th edition, there are some modifications. There are some changes. Changes to both the beginning as well as the end. And also kind of a change that reformulates everything in between. Because we've been talking about the 4 pillars, but now that nomenclature is so old. It's so last year, Now all the kids are talking about it as dimensions. And the reason why is because when you think of a pillar, you think of something solid and on its own. And if you think of something being supported by pillars, each pillar kind of has its own space. It divides up the load and is therefore able to carry the weight down to the ground on its own, so to speak. And there's a risk in that, to think of this intellectual pillar as separate from the pastoral, as separate from the spiritual, as separate from the human, as if they don't actually interact and reinforce one another and actually blend beautifully. Because when we say preach the gospel, for instance, it's not just us being pastoral. We also have to connect with our audience, which relies on us being very human. We also have to, connect with our audience through the Spirit and through our own life given in the Spirit. So our spiritual lives are certainly going to need to be made bare. But then also all that we've learned also will hopefully come out in what we are saying when we preach. And so all of those pillars are, in a sense, activated. And so now the nomenclature is dimensions. They are not 4 pillars, but 4 dimensions. And you might think that, it's just a change in language, but it really is a change in the intent of how seminaries carry out their formation and how we identify certain components and aspects to the day in, day out grind, so to speak, of the seminary formation that guys go through. It's to be able to see and to experience how all of these things play into a well-rounded individual who will hopefully be ordained one day. So that's one of the big changes. Now, fathers, you spent how many years here at Loras for your philosophy degree? 2-3 years, something like that?
Yeah, 2 years for me.
Because I was on the Father Kevin accelerated plan as well. I was only here for 2 years, and it was somewhere between 2 or 4 years once upon a time. And now there's a recognition that because guys who are discerning are coming in to seminary with all sorts of questions, with all sorts of different experiences, with all sorts of different maybe obstacles that might prevent them or keep them from actually entering into formation and hearing the vocational call of the Lord in their heart, that there needs to be maybe a little bit more of an intention to give guys time to actually enter in. Because the risk was, back in our day, was we show up, we move in, they hand us our course load, and this is our schedule. We have to buy our books, and off we go. And then the intellectual pillar, so to speak, kind of reigned supreme. And it was the thing that got all of our attention. And of course, neglecting the spiritual side of things, neglecting the human side of things, really kept us from maybe being able to fully benefit from all that seminary was going to have for us. And so now we have, get this, guys, get ready. If you or your listeners can spell this on the first try, you win my respect. We call it the Propaedeutic year. Propaedeutic. Wow. It means to prepare. It means to get ready. And the first year that men join seminary now is meant to be set aside apart from philosophy. In fact, they're not even supposed to necessarily engage with actual formal philosophy coursework. They're just meant to have some space to kind of get going, but really delve deeply into their spiritual lives, into Scripture, and into Christ communicating with them through various prayers and the experience of adoration and coming together and praying the rosary, doing Lectio Divina, that it's there, as well as a kind of a deep dive into what does it mean to be human? What does the Catholic Church teach about who we are as human? And certainly John Paul II, whose feast we just celebrated recently, had much to say when it came to the theology of the body, when it came to who we are as persons, and that as persons we're meant to be gifts. And so we lead men now in their first year into a more intentional focus on those 2 dimensions of formation, the spiritual and the human, so as to prepare them for all of the intellectual stuff that will follow, as well as all of the pastoral stuff that they will be called to. So now, guys, when they come to seminary, we'll always start with that first Propaedeutic year. And then after that, they might only need 2 years to get a philosophy degree. Maybe they'll need 3, or perhaps even 4. But whatever it might be, they'll always start with that one dedicated year. A year that we didn't necessarily have, but at least in my own reflection, I think I probably could have used it.
Absolutely.
I don't know about you guys, but what were you guys coming from when you guys discerned you're called to the priesthood? What track in life were you at, and how much of a kind of a gear shift was it for you to all of a sudden be in a philosophy class and be in seminary?
Well, I was a perfectly formed saint when I started seminary, so just kidding, just kidding. So yeah.
Well, back in my day, back when I went to seminary, we had 4 separate marble pillars, and we liked it.
Mhm.
But I'll give this dimension talk all a chance here and stay on the call. But no, that's a very good question. When I was joined seminary and decided I'm going to try out seminary and probably be a priest one day. There was still a lot of questions, a lot of doubt. I didn't understand myself, and then launch right into coursework and the work and anxieties that came with that. Then trying to figure out myself, human relationships, all of that. Not that what we had at the time was good, but however, I can really see how the soft entry and the dimensions overlapping and bleeding together could be extremely beneficial to a man who's because discerning. We've talked a lot about learning things, and then even listening to what Jesus has to say to us and the Holy Spirit's movement throughout the day. Uh, but there's also discernment as well. I entered not knowing if I was going to be a priest or not, if I was going to see this through. And that's not a bad thing. It's an ongoing discernment, kind of like dating before you get engaged. Um, yeah, so I could see how those would really, really benefit someone who's exploring their vocation.
Yeah, and in fact, that question, am I called to be a priest? You don't have to have that answer right from the get-go. In fact, the program for priestly formation kind of envisions that a man would come into that first year, that Propaedeutic year, and really just want to settle a different question. Of course, that question will be on their mind, but the real, more immediate question is, do I want to give myself to this relationship with the church as a seminarian,
Hmm.
as someone who is intentionally discerning, being set aside from the world and the worries of work and how to, meet the bills, whether it's water, electricity, or whatever, all of the different concerns in life. The church just wants men to first give themselves the permission to be able to be set aside from all of that and to have the space to discern, to understand. It's like, just like in a relationship, the first question, might not be the big question, right? The first question isn't, are we going to get married? The first question is, do I just want to date with this person? That's why you go on that first date.
Mhm.
And that's why you go into that first year of seminary. Do you want to actually be set aside in this world? Do you actually want to devote space to Christ and give yourself over to being formed and to being open to this call? That's the more immediate question. And that's what our seminarians have that first year in order to answer. Because after that first year, they can come back and say, you know what, this was really good for me, but I don't think that I'm called to be set apart like this. I don't think that this is where I need to be. I feel like the Lord he has something for me elsewhere. And that's great. And then the other side of it, it's not, oh, I'm definitely going to be a priest. It's, no, this is what I need in order to understand whether or not the Lord is calling me to the priesthood. That question, the big question, is still open after their first year. It's then that they go into a different stage of discernment, no longer preparing and discerning whether or not seminary is for them, but then in that next stage, that discipleship stage, they start to ask the question, is my relationship with Christ as his disciple actually called to be something more and to actually perhaps be configured like him and so live like him as a celibate priest in the church? And so that might be 2 or 3 years after that initial first year. Um, and so each stage of seminary is supposed to ask a different question, and it's supposed to build upon the others until you get to the point, right? Which would happen in the last stage, well, the second to last stage, the configuration stage, where the question there really is about becoming a priest and laying down one's life like Christ for the sake of the church. It's there that question actually becomes the question that is on the mind and the heart of the seminarian.
So I think it's worth highlighting. Speaking of new nomenclature for us priests who are under the PPF edition number 5, we essentially just conceive of the stages of philosophy and theology, right? 2 years of philosophy, 4 years of theology. There's deacon ordination in there, and then you're ordained a priest, right? And so what you're highlighting is, in addition to this Propaedeutic year, which is new, and I believe this is just the second year we've been doing it here in the Archdiocese of Dubuque. Ever, but I think it's very fantastic, by the way. But now it's not just conceiving, like you said, of these academic kind of divisions of you're studying philosophy, now you're studying theology, to the much more focused on where am I in the question of discerning Christ's call in my life. And so recapping them, you said Propaedeutic, then discipleship stage. Is that the next?
That's right.
Stage? And then what was the third stage?
It's called the configuration stage.
Configuration stage.
So, yeah. So, whereas that first one, we're preparing to lead us to know whether or not seminary is for us, the discipleship stage is living in that relationship with Christ as his disciple to see whether or not he's calling us to be sent and to be more closely aligned to him, to dedicate ourselves as a celibate, as someone who's set apart to live like Christ. And then that third stage, the configuration stage, centers around the question of how is God conforming me to look like him? Mm-hmm. Because as much as Father Jacob really does have a striking resemblance to Jesus Christ as he was, many of us are going to actually show forth different aspects of the life of God, right? And different aspects of the life of Christ. And for each man, it's going to be a little bit different. And so the third stage, when we're learning about theology, when we're learning about Christ, we're asking the question, Christ, how are you calling me to be more deeply conformed, and so that I can be a bridge to you for the sake of others? And then we get into a final stage, which is also, well, a difference. Because what happened to you guys when you got done with your theology studies? You guys were ordained and sent to your first assignment.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. However, today it's going to be a little bit different. There's actually a final stage called a vocational synthesis stage. And this happens after a man is ordained a deacon. Whereas, correct me if I'm wrong, because when I was ordained a deacon, I still had that last year or a little bit less than a year at seminary to kind of be like the senior, but to be a deacon too,
Big man on campus.
You were kind of the big man on campus, exactly. Mm-hmm. And then you were just sent back to the diocese, you were ordained, and then when you first go into a parish, you're a priest.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But today, what the PPF is asking the bishops and asking all of the dioceses is to allow men to have this time where just at the beginning, they kind of had a slow start, a time to have some space to really adjust into seminary. Now they want also at the end a little bit of space, a little bit of time, so that guys can be able to transition well into ministry or transition out of seminary. And so when guys are ordained to the diaconate, rather than going back and being the big man on campus, they're actually sent out to begin to live that life that is now configured to Christ in ministry, in all of those small ways that some of us maybe just kind of skipped over because we went straight from being a seminarian in a parish in a summer to all of a sudden being a priest in a parish. I mean, I didn't even get to baptize anybody as a deacon. I didn't have that experience of, going to the hospitals as a deacon. And there's so much that one can learn
Mhm.
as a future priest on what it's like to be a
Mhm.
cleric, what it's like to be a deacon, and to live in a community. It's meant to be a synthesis of their vocation, so as to give them that solid foundation, so that when they're ordained a priest 6 months later, that they're really equipped, capable, fully reflective, and ready to pour their life out for those that they have already began to serve and now desire to serve more fully as a priest.
Mhm. Propaedeutic, discipleship, configuration, vocational synthesis.
That's right. All
Wow.
of the all of the words that are very difficult to spell. I spell propaedeutic wrong just about every time I try to type it,
You'll
and
get there.
synthesis always gives me a kind of a roundabout way. I just thank God for autocorrect on uh, on these text fields wherever I'm typing.
Huh.
Mhm.
So these yeah, this new system and understanding them as dimensions, how are you, and you're doing this all alone, correct? It's just you versus 10 guys in the house, right?
It is just me versus the world. No, of
Yes.
course not. The work of seminary is always a work of a community.
Hmm.
And there are so many people surrounded by me. If you look on paper, you might think that there's very few people here at the seminary. Of course, I'm assigned here as the rector. We do have another priest, Father Bob Gross, who's our spiritual formator and lead spiritual director for the men. But on staff here, we also have a Mrs. Kelsey Kaiser who helps with the human and pastoral formation. She is a coordinator, especially for those guys in their early years when they do a deep dive into what does it mean to be human, and um, uh, also how is it that I might be called to bring Christ to others, to be aware of the multi dimensions of pastoral ministry, so that they are able to discern well. So the three of us form kind of like the staff here. But if we just stopped there, we would be missing so many others, because there's members of our community, whether it's here at the local parish, who will constantly be working with the men, um, whether it's the different parishes that these guys are going out into for their pastoral experiences. Because in addition to going to classes, they're also going into parishes. They're also going down to like the free meal that the community here in Dubuque puts together down at St. Patrick's for the poor. Um, they also are singing in choirs and have music directors and those that are teaching them how to chant and teaching them how to sing at Mass. Uh, there's just so many. They're instructors, they're professors, people at Loras campus ministry at Loras. All the way down to the people who they're still connected to at home, and their home parishes are
Mhm.
supporting them.
Hmm.
um, I suppose I should also mention Father Mark Murphy here in the Archdiocese, our vocation director. And even though here at the seminary we have actually 5 guys from Dubuque, we also have uh, then 7 guys not from Dubuque, but we have 4 from Des Moines and 3 from Davenport. And those dioceses have their vocations directors, have their priests who are in charge of directing their seminarians, and they help out in so many different ways uh, to promote and to encourage them through their time in seminary. So I can't take all the credit. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, even the Knights of Columbus help out in
Mhm.
wonderful ways. There's the local council of the Sarans, who are very invested. There are many schools throughout the archdiocese that will write letters and encourage these guys. We even got a box of candy from the kind parishioners of Epiphany Parish up in Mason City. Um,
Ah.
and let me tell you, when you have 12 young men and a box of candy, um, that box of candy didn't have much chance to survive past just a few hours.
Mhm.
They really appreciated that. So the work of forming these men, even here at a small seminary with only 12 guys. It takes a lot of people to invest themselves and to give of themselves, to show these guys the full length and breadth and width of the church, and who they will come to serve.
Who feeds them?
Well, that's an interesting question. There's another name that I forgot. So in one sense, they feed themselves. They do
Oh.
go and buy groceries. They're in charge of the budget. They're in charge of knowing what to get. They have to get what's on the list. And so if they want something for lunch, um, they got to communicate with one another. Sometimes that's all part of formation, learning how to communicate just basic needs. Um, but they're only cooking for themselves on Monday and Thursday, as well as all of their different lunches. And then on the weekends, breakfast, even though we're all down there together, everyone's kind of making their own breakfast, whether it's cereal or eggs or toast. There is a kind soul who will come in once a week to cook for us. Her name's Marlene, and she provides some wonderful home cooking. It's one of the favorite nights for the guys, because it's kind of like our proverbial mother comes into the house, takes over in the kitchen, and just fills the whole Vienna house here with the aromas of gravy and meatloaf and everything else that just kind of says everything about home. But we also eat over at Loras. The Propaedeutic guys tonight will actually be out at what's the other seminary here in the Archdiocese of Dubuque, the Divine Word Seminary. Whereas we are a diocesan seminary, and so we're preparing men specifically for the diocesan priesthood or parish priesthood. The Divine Word Seminary out in Epworth is preparing men and women both for missionary work. And so the men there, some of them will just be brothers going off to serve in various parts of the world, to preach and proclaim the gospel. The sisters will do the same, and some of the men will then be ordained onto priests for the Divine Word congregation. And our guys will go out there and they get to experience the global church. And they're actually going to be eating out with them tonight, which they love because the food out there is also pretty good. Maybe not quite as good as Marlene's, but close.
And just speaking of Divine Word, I know we as the Archdiocese, we experience much support for them besides them forming seminaries. We've had a number of international priests who have studied at Divine Word come from other countries, other dioceses to study English or study some other degrees, and then will serve in our diocese for a period before they return to their own diocese. So we have a good mutually beneficial relationship with Divine Word Seminary in Epworth. So just to plug in about that.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. In my studies over in Rome, I would from time to time encounter a Divine Word missionary going to class at one of the universities in Rome. And when they would hear that I was from the United States, they were very eager to see if I knew where Epworth was. Do you know where Epworth is? And it just, I had to try to communicate to them how lucky they were to be talking to me because of all of the Americans. I do know where Epworth is, but that's not something that most Americans would know where that's at. In
Epworth,
fact, there's a
Iowa
lot
is.
of there's a lot of people from Iowa that wouldn't know where Epworth is, and yet for the Divine Word missionaries, when they hear of America, they think of their seminary in America, which happens to be in Epworth. So they speak of Epworth as if it's like, New York, Los Angeles, Denver, and Epworth.
Beautiful. You talked and gave a pretty detailed smattering of what a seminarian is going to do during this academic school year, from various meals to schoolwork to community. What do they do during the summers?
Yeah, so I suppose it depends a little bit. That first year, that Propaedeutic year, is really meant to be a year. It's meant to be 12 months. And so
Mhm.
their summer is somewhat organized by the seminary itself. And so we have them as part of their pastoral experience of getting to know the diocese, traveling about from different parish to different parish, coming to understand what it means to live as someone who is sent by Christ. We have them participate in the Totus Tuus that we have here in the Archdiocese of Dubuque that sends college age kids as catechists into parishes to lead catechesis for children of all ages, all the way up into high school. And so that's what they do through their summer of that first year. But after that, they're kind of let loose of the seminary, and their particular diocese will be responsible for making sure that they then experience other aspects of ministry in a more tangible way, which can take on many different forms. Sometimes they will spend a summer in a parish, live with priests, get to know what it's like to be a parish priest and the different functions and different activities and events that occur in a parish, which is important because sometimes guys grow up only knowing the one parish that they've always known. And it's good for them to get an experience of maybe a different one. But it could also be an experience of a hospital, going and being a hospital chaplain, or even following or job shadowing a chaplain for a time and getting to know what it's like to minister to those who are sick and ill and who are in nursing homes, etc. Um, Sometimes there's other programs for them to go into a deep dive of priestly identity, and they might do something like that. Or they might do like a Spanish immersion where they travel and they try to learn Spanish while being surrounded. But all of those experiences are meant to, uh, yeah, just give a more tangible experiences of the things that perhaps they wouldn't be able to do while they're taking classes. But the summertime will give them the availability and the freedom to do those things.
Has it ever happened that a seminarian would either decide or discern that I think I'm going to step away from seminary and not complete formation, and then maybe spend some time in the outside world, or maybe in a religious order, and then come back to it? Has that ever happened before?
Never.
That hasn't happened on a day when Marlene cooks.
Oh, okay.
Um, but no, of course that happens, and that's actually a very normal aspect of seminary work, of seminary life. Guys discern in, guys discern out. Um, Guys will maybe not be ready at a particular time to really address the questions, or they might not yet be captivated to give themselves completely. And yet, just because that might be the season that they're in doesn't necessarily mean that things aren't going well or things are off. Just like a dating relationship.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes guys will come in and this will only confirm to them, oh, no, the Lord is calling me to the married life. Man, um, you know, I respect what priests do. I love prayer. I love Christ, but it just seems like Christ is actually calling me not to this. And that's great. I mean, praise God that they were willing to give of themselves to this question, to contemplate what Christ might be calling them to, and they got an answer. Um, uh, Obviously, we're not rooting for guys to come here and then to leave, but we are rooting for guys to come here and to grow closer to Christ. And if them growing closer to Christ means for them to leave here, we're okay with that. Our
Mm.
mission isn't just to make priests, it's for us to be able to form men after the heart of Christ to be priests. So it's the forming men in the life of Christ that is really what we're about. If all we had to do is make priests, I mean, the Archbishop could just set up a line and he could just ordain one guy after another. But obviously, we don't want to do that either. We actually want men who resemble the life of Christ. And so that's what we try to do in the seminaries, form men after that heart. And if that means that they're called to marriage, well, then we are happy for them to go out and get married and to be productive in the church as a layman.
Mhm. I remember when I was discerning joining seminary, that was one thing they talked about is you go to seminary to discern more fully. And and then you go and it's to learn how to listen to God's call, to cultivate a prayer life, to be a man after his own heart more fully. And like you said, Father Jeff, that that would lead some men to, in discerning Christ's call, to that would lead them into marriage. And many of them, I remember in my time in seminary, there were guys who left, and many of them are still serving the church in various capacities, that have become, working in staff in parishes, and are still helping serve the Lord in other beautiful ways as lay people and married mothers, husbands and fathers, with their spouses and so on. Or some have gone into secular work, but I know one friend I was in seminary with who discerned out, but was, seminary helped deepen his own faith, that now he works in a secular workplace. But I know he walks around with his coffee cup on his breaks, and he just strikes up conversations with his coworkers, and very frequently they turn to conversation about those deeper questions about God, and they know he practices his faith. So what does that mean? And his formation in seminary has actually helped equip him to be more ready to engage people in that. So it's a beautiful thing that even if we serve men who don't go on to be or form men who don't go on to be ordained priests, that very often they are still formed to more deeply follow the call of the Lord and serve Him. Um, I will also add, I think Father Jacob's question was a bit of a fishing question for me, because I myself am a product of one who discerned out of seminary. Some of our listeners may or may not know this, but I was in seminary. I did my 2 years of philosophy and a year of theology, and then I discerned out. I felt I was at a point I had to step away to explore some other things, particularly looking into the possibility of religious life, and joined a group of Franciscans. So shout out to the Franciscans of the Eucharist of Chicago, in the Archdiocese of Chicago at the Mission of Our Lady of the Angels. But then through that journey was able to continue to pray and listen to God's call, and felt He was calling me back. And then I returned to seminary, and they took me back, and then they finished forming me, and then ordained me. But they didn't really finish forming me because, of course, formation is ongoing. As priests, we talk about ongoing formation. So always being formed, but part of seminary is equipping us with the tools to know how to continue to be open to the Lord's formation in our life.
Yeah, I asked that question. You're right; it was fishing, and yet I despise the phrase that's used. Like, if a guy discerns out of seminary or leaves formation, it can be said that, oh, he quit or he dropped out. I don't want to say. I mean, if a young boyfriend and girlfriend break up, did you quit? I don't know. You probably discerned that it wasn't right for you, and to echo we're all the better for it, because until the time of marriage or ordination, it's all still seeking, and until that time that the commitment is made, you want to make sure everything's in place as much as you can. So that's what I think.
Yeah. So this maybe brings us to kind of one of our final questions as we're coming to the end here. But some may or may not know, but this week that this podcast is aired is National Vocations Awareness Week. You can learn about that at United States Council of Catholic Bishops website, USCCB. But this week is National Vocations Awareness Week, celebrated this week as an annual week-long celebration of the Catholic Church in the United States, dedicated to promoting vocations of the priesthood, diaconate, and consecrated life through prayer and education, and to renew our prayers and support for those who are considering one of those particular vocations.
You
So I
memorize
want to
that.
ask the question, um, of how do we support seminarians, particularly those who are in seminary now, but also how do we invite, support, encourage, foster young men to discern a possibility of a call to priesthood. And I say this also knowing that we're in this journey in faith process in our archdiocese. And one of the surveys we did showed that a lot of people have never invited a young man to think about priesthood. I think over 80% answer that question for never had invited a young man to think about priesthood. So maybe to kind of close out here, just how can we pray for and support our seminarians, but also how can we maybe foster, encourage other young men to consider the possibility of vocation to the priesthood?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And indeed, certainly, I mean, there's like those hard ways of being able to support the seminary. So it does take resources. It takes you know f- the finances to be able to have a house like this and to support them and to send them to education. And so you can always give monetarily to the Archdiocese of Dubuque in support of its seminarians and its seminary to make sure that has a happy and long-term future. There's also the prayers that you can say each and every day. Prayer does matter. You could send cards. Guys here love to hear from parishes and from people, and an encouraging word can really sometimes mean a lot to these guys. But then there's also just kind of maybe, and even perhaps more important, so to call this like a soft way of support might call it something, or it might sound like it's not important, but it is. Whatever you can do to make discerning a call to the priesthood not weird,
Mm.
right? When someone says, "Hey, I'm thinking about the priesthood," it's like, "What? Really? The priesthood? Why?" You know, and sometimes we can react and we can establish an environment where discerning a call to the priesthood or going over to the seminary or even being a seminarian is kind of like this weird thing. And yet, really, it's not that weird. It's just desiring to follow the call of Christ in your life. Isn't that something that should be normal? Isn't that something that everyone should be wanting to do? And that a young man would actually be thinking about becoming a priest. Should be encouraged and supported just by virtue of us seeing and experiencing that as a good thing, as a normal thing. You know, when a third grader says, "I really like to serve Mass," if our reaction is, "What, serve Mass? Why not just go play football? Just be a normal boy and go like to play football." We're setting ourselves up for a kind of uh, uh, disaster, so to speak, because we're making something that should be a good thing and perceived as a good thing into something that it's not. Uh, so I think, fostering the sense that seminary is on the table. It is an option. It is something that is normal for a young Catholic man to have a period in his life to actually think about it. In fact, I would say if we are a young Catholic man, we should think about it. We should think about the priesthood. We should think about married life. We should think about consecrated life. And until we can see and experience each of those vocations as a good thing, we really haven't given them their full opportunity to convict our heart. And if we recognize those things all as good things, we will only be better in whichever one we're called to for that, because we'll actually see it how it um, is interacts with one another and see how it is in light of the whole plan that God has for us. So I think that's the big thing, you know. Uh, Make it a normal thing for guys to consider the seminary and the priesthood. And even just know that we have a seminary. A lot of people don't know that we have a seminary at Loras College called St. Pius X. Sometimes they just think that guys just go off somewhere else and become a priest, and then they come back and they're older and wiser and they look more tired. But no, we have seminarians right here in Dubuque. They're sent out into our parishes each and every summer. This is a normal part of the life of the church. So let's make sure that it's even more prevalent moving forward.
And I do like to remind people. I often remind my parishes that you know priests don't just fall from heaven. They are grown up from the parishes. So to your point, where you said Father Jeff Dole is, I think, encouraging every young man to at least give a serious consideration to the possibility that God may be calling you, to the priesthood, and so that's at least worth giving consideration to. And hopefully, listeners to this podcast are encouraged to appreciate that also priests, like, they receive uh, in seminary. It's a very thorough and holistic formation. Um, that I think really sets them up to live well in life in general, but particularly in serving the Lord. So I hope one takeaway for our listeners is to appreciate that it's not just we're just not just cranking them through the machine to send them through all their classes so they get the stuff in their head to know the right stuff, but we're really doing this holistic formation of the mind and the heart to help men uh, respond with the fullness of who they are to Christ, to listen to Him, to follow Him, to serve Him, and through their whole being, their whole humanity, their whole personality, everything that they are, to be a vessel, to be a channel of Christ, of who He is, His goodness, His grace, and a bridge to link people, to draw people to Christ. So it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful call, and yeah.
Thank you, Father Jeff Dole, for doing your part and helping form the future priests of America and the Archdiocese.
Well, thank you for having me on, and thank you for you guys doing your part, building up the church here in the Archdiocese and being a good example of priestly living for so many. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Father Kevin, I do have to correct you, though. You said that priests don't just fall from heaven, and that is true. However, they do come from Wisconsin, which I think is
Amen.
pretty close.
That's where I'm from. Yeah.
All right, everyone listening, thank you so much. I hope you learned about dimensions and propaedeutic years, and look up how to support a local seminarian through the Archdiocese or through the Knights of Columbus or the Sarin Club, or send them a box of candy. Can't go wrong there. Thank you, everyone. We will see you in the Eucharist.